Hey, Grandma, you sure you know which end of the mop to use? This isn't your kitchen floor. The lazy drawl of Sergeant Decker echoed across the polished concrete of the advanced marksmanship facility, each word dripping with condescending amusement. The crowd of young, eager soldiers, all sharp uniforms and sharper haircuts, chuckled in unison. They were a captive audience, and Decker was their master of ceremonies, his arrogance a uniform he wore more proudly than his stripes. The woman he addressed did not flinch. She did not turn. Her back, ramrod straight despite the slight stoop of her 60-odd years, remained a silent testament to a discipline Decker couldn't comprehend. Her hands, wrinkled and spotted with age, continued their methodical work, wiping down a steel workbench with a slow, deliberate grace that was almost hypnotic. There was no wasted motion, no hesitation. It was the economy of movement born from a lifetime of practice, though no one there could have possibly guessed at what craft. She was simply the new cleaner, a stooped figure in a gray jumpsuit who had appeared a week ago, a ghost haunting the periphery of their high-stakes world. But when the visiting general at the far end of the observation deck saw her stance, a flicker of something ancient and profound stirred in his memory. He saw not a cleaner, but a foundation. He saw a posture as solid and unyielding as the granite mountains he'd trained in decades ago. If you believe that true strength requires no announcement, type silence below. Decker, emboldened by the laughter of his subordinates, continued his performance. He swaggered over, leaning against the workbench she was cleaning, deliberately smudging the surface she had just polished. Seriously, they're letting anyone wander in here now? This is a Tier 1 training facility, ma'am. The equipment in this room costs more than your house. Probably more than your whole life savings. He gestured expansively at the rows of M210 enhanced sniper rifles resting in their cradles, their advanced optics gleaming under the sterile fluorescent lights. These are instruments of precision, not toys for the cleaning staff to gawk at. The soldiers shuffled their feet, the humor of the moment beginning to curdle into something more uncomfortable. The woman, Anya, as her simple name tag read, finally finished her task. She placed the rag neatly on her utility cart, her movements unhurried and calm. Her eyes, a pale, washed-out blue, lifted to meet his for a fraction of a second. There was no anger in them, no fear, no emotion at all. It was the dispassionate gaze of a geologist studying a common rock. This unnerving lack of reaction only served to fuel Decker's irritation. He saw it as defiance, a silent rebuke from someone so far beneath him she had no right to even register on his command radar. He was about to deliver another cutting remark when the facility's main alarm blared, a piercing electronic shriek that cut through the tension like a blade. All eyes snapped to the main monitor, where a single, ominous word flashed in red: system failure. The crisis unfolded with humiliating speed. The demonstration, a live-fire test of a new Ares targeting system for a delegation of military brass led by General Thorne, was dead in the water. The complex network of atmospheric sensors, laser rangefinders, and ballistic computers that allowed the M210 to make impossible shots had simply gone dark. The base's top technicians swarmed the firing station, their faces slick with the sweat of panicked incompetence. They spoke in frantic acronyms and technical jargon, a chaotic language of failure. Decker, whose flawless presentation had just imploded, barked orders that accomplished nothing, his authority evaporating with every passing second. General Thorne stood observing from the glass-walled control room, his arms crossed, his expression a mask of cold disappointment. The target was a 1-inch disc at 2,000 meters, a shot designed to be a triumphant display of technological supremacy. Now, it was a monument to their hubris. Amidst the chaos, Anya continued her work, pushing her cart along the far wall, her presence so unassuming she was practically invisible. She methodically emptied trash receptacles, her calm a stark contrast to the rising panic. As she passed the crippled firing station, she paused. Her gaze lingered on the inert rifle, her head tilting slightly, as if listening to a conversation no one else could hear. Decker, noticing her proximity, snapped, "Ma'am, get back. This is a restricted area. Can't you read the signs?" Anya paid him no mind. Her focus was absolute, drawn to the silent, useless rifle as if by magnetic force. She moved toward the firing bench, her steps soft and sure. Decker moved to intercept her, his face a thunderous cloud of fury and embarrassment. "I said, step away from the equipment. That's an order." But his voice lacked its earlier conviction. It was thin, reedy, the bluster of a man who had lost control. Anya didn't even look at him. She reached the M210, her wrinkled fingers hovering over the complex housing of the Ares optic. The technicians stopped their frantic typing, turning to stare at the old woman in the cleaner's jumpsuit who was now standing at the heart of their technological meltdown. For a moment, a surreal stillness fell over the range. Then, with a practiced precision that was utterly bewildering, Anya's hands went to work. From a small leather pouch on her belt, she produced a single, worn, L-shaped tool, its metal darkened with age. She inserted it into a tiny, unmarked recess on the underside of the scope mount, a port the manufacturer's own schematics didn't show. With a quarter turn, there was a soft, mechanical click. The advanced digital display remained dark, but something deep within the rifle's architecture had shifted. She then picked up the weapon. The 20-pound rifle settled into her shoulder, as if it were a missing part of her own anatomy. She assumed a stance, a perfect textbook-prone position, in a single, fluid motion that defied her apparent age. Her breathing slowed, her body became utterly still. Using only the rifle's rudimentary backup iron sights, she sighted downrange. There was a moment of profound, deafening silence. Then a single, sharp crack echoed through the facility. On the main monitor, the digital target display, still connected to the impact sensors, flashed to life. A single, perfect, dead-center hole appeared in the 1-inch disc 2 kilometers away. The silence that followed the shot was a physical entity. It pressed in on the eardrums, heavier and more profound than the preceding alarm. The technicians stared, mouths agape, at the monitor displaying the impossible result. A cold-bore shot, with no electronic assistance, on a target that size, at that range, was not a matter of skill. It was a statistical impossibility. It was a violation of the known laws of ballistics. Sergeant Decker stood frozen, his face a pale mask of disbelief. The sneer had been wiped clean, replaced by a slack-jawed vacancy. "No," he whispered, the word barely audible. "No way. That is not possible." He looked from the monitor to the old woman, now calmly rising to her feet, to the rifle she was placing gently back in its cradle. The entire narrative of his world, a world built on advanced technology, hierarchical authority, and his own perceived expertise, had been dismantled by a single, perfectly placed round fired by the janitor. The laughter of his men had been replaced by a collective, stunned reverence. They weren't looking at him anymore. They were all looking at her. They were looking at Anya, who was now calmly returning the small, worn tool to the pouch on her belt, her expression as placid and unreadable as it had been when he had insulted her. The impossible had just happened, and the source of that impossibility was wiping her hands on a clean rag, as if she had just finished dusting a shelf. The spell of disbelief was broken by the sound of a door hissing open. General Thorne emerged from the observation booth, his stride long and purposeful. He didn't look at the technicians. He didn't look at the monitor. He didn't even glance at the disgraced Sergeant Decker. His eyes, sharp and intelligent, were fixed solely on Anya. He walked directly to her, stopping a respectful distance away. The entire facility held its breath. The general, a man whose presence commanded immediate and absolute deference, now seemed to be the one offering it. "Ma'am," he began, his voice low and steady, a stark contrast to Decker's earlier shouting. "That was the finest display of pure marksmanship I have witnessed in my 40 years of service. May I have your name?" Anya met his gaze, and for the first time, a flicker of something, perhaps recognition, danced in her pale blue eyes. "Anya," she said, her voice soft but clear. Anya Volkov, the name hung in the air. For the general, It was not a name. It was a key, unlocking a dusty, classified corner of his memory, a file from the iciest depths of the Cold War. A look of dawning, staggering realization crossed his face. He turned to his aide, who had followed him out onto the range floor. "Major, give me access to the Umbra archives. Search the name Volkov. Classification level. Ghost." The major, looking confused but obedient, tapped furiously at his secure tablet. After a moment of tense silence, his eyes went wide. He held the tablet out to the general, his hand trembling slightly. General Thorne took the tablet, his gaze scanning the screen. The silence on the range stretched into an eternity as he read. The men watched his face, saw his eyebrows arch, saw his jaw tighten not with anger, but with a profound, almost sacred awe. He looked up from the screen, his eyes finding Anya's once more. Then he turned to face the assembled soldiers, his voice resonating with an authority that was absolute. "This woman," he began, his voice a low thunder, "is not a cleaner. She is not a civilian contractor." He held up the tablet. "This is Senior Warrant Officer Anya Volkov, retired. Her code name was Kestrel. She was the lead instructor for the Soviet Union's Phantom sniper program for 20 years. He paused, letting the weight of the word sink in. After the fall of the wall, she was quietly recruited by a joint NATO task force. The list of her confirmed engagements is classified above my own pay grade. The medals she was awarded are not in our archives because our nations didn't officially admit they existed." He looked directly at Decker, his eyes like chips of ice. "The M210 rifle, Sergeant? She was on the design team. The Ares targeting system that just failed you? She wrote the manual override protocols. That little tool she used? It is the only key in existence that can access the pure mechanical linkage of the firing system. She didn't break the rules of ballistics. She wrote them." General Thorne then did something no one on that base had ever seen. He turned back to Anya, drew himself up to his full height, and executed the sharpest, most formal salute of his entire career. "Ma'am," he boomed, his voice echoing in the stunned silence. "Permission to stand in your presence." The story of that moment became legend before the echo of the general's salute had even faded. It traveled through the base's fiber optic cables and whispered conversations faster than any official report. They called it the Kestrel shot. They talked about the look on Decker's face, a perfect mask of shattered arrogance. They talked about the general, a living icon of command, standing at attention for the stooped, gray-haired cleaner. The firing point she had used was unofficially renamed the Kestrel Perch, and hitting a target from that position became a new, informal badge of honor among the base's elite marksmen. The rifle she had used was carefully removed from service, encased in glass, and mounted in the main briefing hall with a simple brass plaque that read, "Anya's rifle." Competence is a quiet language. The legend grew with each retelling, acquiring the mythic quality of institutional folklore. It became a parable, a teaching tool about the deadly sin of assumption. It was a story told to every new recruit who strutted onto the range with more confidence than skill, a potent reminder that the most dangerous weapon in the room might not be the one on the rack. The quiet professionalism Anya embodied became the new gold standard, a concept spoken of with a reverence previously reserved for combat medals. Sergeant Decker was not formally punished, at least not on paper. General Thorne understood that public humiliation was a far more effective instructor than a written reprimand. Decker's true penance was the loss of face, the sudden, sharp inversion of the respect he had taken for granted. He became quiet, withdrawn. The swagger was gone, replaced by a cautious humility. A week after the incident, he found Anya in a small supply closet, meticulously organizing cleaning supplies. He stood in the doorway, his large frame seeming to shrink. He offered a halting, sincere apology, his words clumsy but his shame genuine. At the end of it, he asked, his voice barely a whisper, "Ma'am, could you teach me?" Anya finished placing a bottle of solvent on a shelf, ensuring its label was perfectly aligned with the others. She turned, looked at the humbled sergeant, and gave a single, slow nod. Her lessons began the next day. They contained no lectures on theory, no grand speeches. She taught through action. She would adjust his stance with a gentle pressure from her fingertips. She would demonstrate a breathing technique by simply standing beside him, her own chest rising and falling in a slow, perfect rhythm. She taught him to listen to the wind, to feel the rifle as an extension of his own will, to find the silence within himself. Her competence was her curriculum, her silence her most profound lecture. She was not there for accolades or for redemption. She was there because the craft was in her blood, and a master cannot rest while their art is being practiced poorly in their presence. Months bled into a year. The culture of the marksmanship facility transformed. Under Sergeant Decker's new, quiet leadership, the focus shifted from a reliance on technology to a mastery of fundamentals. The Kestrel Protocol became the final, most grueling test in the sniper qualification course. It required candidates to make a series of increasingly difficult shots using only iron sights, forcing them to unlearn their dependence on digital aids and build a true, tactile connection with their weapon. Passing the protocol was rare, and the small, custom-made patch, a simple silhouette of a Kestrel, became the most coveted award on the base. Decker, now a changed man, began every new class with the same story. He spoke of his own ignorance, of his loud and empty arrogance. He told them about the day the base cleaner, a quiet old woman he had mocked, reminded an entire generation of soldiers that respect is earned in silence and proven by a single, perfect action. Anya Volkov was rarely seen anymore. Her official contract as a cleaner had ended, but her presence was more deeply embedded in the facility than its concrete foundations. She was the ghost in the machine, the standard against which all others were measured. Her legacy was not in the glass case or the name on the firing line. It was in the hushed respect of the training halls, in the focused silence of a young soldier mastering their breathing, in the humility of an instructor who had learned his greatest lesson from the person he least expected. She had proven that true authority isn't derived from a rank on a uniform, but from a competence so profound it needs no voice. It is a quiet, gravitational force that bends the world around it, that corrects error, and that builds a legacy not of words, but of deeds. The story of Anya Volkov became a timeless reminder that assumptions are the enemy of wisdom, and that sometimes the most important person in the room is the one no one is paying attention to. True legacy isn't what you leave behind in a record book. It's what continues forward in the actions and attitudes of those you inspired. It is the quiet professional's ultimate victory, to have their principles outlive their presence. For more stories where quiet competence triumphs over loud arrogance and where silent precision defines their worth, subscribe to Unknown Heroine Stories.